Good afternoon, members. It's time, and we have a quorum. This is the first meeting in the horse in the Year of the Horse, so I wish you all a splendid Year of the Horse. Now, let's invite the Chief Executive Secretary into the room. Now, this special House Committee meeting will end at 4 p.m. today. The 15th regular House Committee meeting will be held immediately after the special meeting, and after the regular House Committee meeting, the Finance Committee meeting will be held. Members, if you wish to ask questions, please press the button, and I will have regard to the number of questions raised by members and also the party affiliation, as well as the sequence of pressing the buttons in considering who to call to ask questions. And if I may remind members, please be concise with your questions, and there will be 5 minutes each for you for questions and answers, and as in previous practice, there will be a verbatim record of the meeting. First of all, I would like to welcome the Chief Secretary and her team. May I wish officials good Year of the Horse and also good health. The Secretariat has issued paper number CB2801/13 to 1401, and also information note number IN02/13 to 14. May I now hand over the floor to the Chief Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. This is the first House Committee meeting in the Year of the Horse. May I wish you all great health in the new year, and also I wish you happiness. Now, the consultation paper has been published. As you know, we would like to seek views on population policy. We've started a 4-month consultation period. I already attended one special House Committee meeting on the 8th of November. I've briefed members on the paper, and I've also listened to your views. As some members did not get a chance to speak at the last special meeting, so today, together with the Secretary for Labour and Welfare and Under-Secretary for Education, to come here again to listen to your views. Now, we have issued a paper to you earlier. This is the report to you. Views so far received during the engagement activities. It also highlights the initiatives in the 2014 policy address which are relevant to population policy. Now, this time round, our discussion on population policy covers a wide range of issues and is also much more in depth, because we're going to face an aging population. By 2014, there will be 2.5 million in the elderly population, and then the workforce will decline over time. So we have embarked on an extensive promotion effort. We have attended various forums. We visited the 18 district councils. We also held a number of focus groups meetings to collect views from the stakeholders and experts. We have so far received 800 submissions. Apart from the usual APIs, we've also produced 3 microfilm videos to spark more discussion. I and my colleagues have also attended 3 district forums. Now, there's a more extensive discussion, of course, in the community, and that would obviously lead to controversial issues like importation of labor, the one-way permit, and Hong Kong's capacity to accept immigrants. Now, as we said at the beginning of the engagement exercise, that population policy is always a complex issue. We'd like to listen to more views, and then we will conduct in-depth studies into various subjects as well. Now, the public engagement exercise is still ongoing, but we've already received some views, as I mentioned. That's why in preparing the Policy Address 2014, we've made some response. For example, the consultation document suggests that we should release the existing potential in the workforce. We should encourage female homemakers to rejoin the workforce, and we would also like to promote integration of the ethnic minorities. Now, there are various measures in the policy address in this regard. For example, the Labor and Welfare Bureau is now conducting a study to find out why women leave the workforce, and we also look at factors which may bring them back into the workforce. This will be for our reference. And then the government will also give more resources to improve after-school care services for children aged between 6 and 12. The services will be extended to weekends and after-school hours, and also during school holidays. There will be the more fee remission quota places. And then we will extend we will also improve the neighborhood support childcare project and extend it to a bigger age group. For school-based after-school learning and support, we will provide more resources. We will also provide more services to children who are disadvantaged, and also to take care of children with working parents. And for supporting ethnic minority children, we put a focus on helping them learn Chinese language. For example, supporting EM students in learning Chinese language as a second language, developing vocational Chinese language course, and so on. This will make sure that EM children have the same access to Chinese language education as local students. And different stages in junior secondary schools, we will also provide Chinese language studies for students, and for those who've already left school, we will provide vocational Chinese language course. We are trying to provide multiple pathways to EM children and young people, and enhancing the quality of our population. We will, in the policy address, there are measures to boost education so that we could have more homegrown talents. For example, increasing the opportunities for receiving higher education. So, and there will be more convergence places for sub-degree program graduates every year. And then for 100 outstanding students every year, they will be given scholarships to study overseas. There will also be a vocational education task force to be set up so that we could map out long-term strategies in this respect. In the near run, there will be more resources to secondary schools so that there will be a career counselor in each school. And vocational training, the VTC will also start pilot projects. Subsidies will be given to apprentices and so on. And so we want to encourage young people to join the different trades and sectors. And there will be a $1 billion fund to support the sustainable development of a qualifications framework. The public engagement exercise will continue until the 23rd of February 2014. The administration has commissioned the Social Sciences Research Center of the University of Hong Kong to conduct independent analysis on the reviews received. It is expected that the report on findings and the analysis will be available in the second quarter of 2014. We will carefully study all the views received. We will have discussions among different policy bureaus. On the basis of the initiatives announced in the 2014 policy address, we will be formulating action plans and concrete measures in the second half of 2014. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I and my colleagues are more than happy to listen to members' views and to also answer questions. So 5 minutes each. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong next, Mr. Albert Chen. Sorry? Could the Chief Secretary give us his text, please? Yes, we could do so. Thank you, Mr. Wong Ting Kwong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From the business sector, some have expressed this view. In Asia, among other Asian places, Hong Kong has higher wages and the conditions of service. Still, there have been much difficulties in recruiting staff, in some trades in particular. On importation of labor, the labor sector, labor unions have expressed strong opposition to that. So how could the administration address these issues? You mentioned training and so on, but they can't really address the immediate issues we face. Now, there are many trades in Hong Kong facing this difficulty. How are you going to help them and give them immediate relief? Chief Secretary? Yes, we share Mr. Wong Ting Kwong's observation. That's why in this consultation exercise, as I said, that we cannot really avoid some of the controversial issues. For example, the workforce, or rather the difficulties in recruiting staff. Now, what we, every month in the Labour Department, there are over 100,000 vacancies being advertised. And in some particular trades, there's a high vacancy rate. For example, elderly care homes in the third quarter of 2013, the vacancy rate is as high as 9.6%, some 2,100 vacancies. So we would like to work together with the labour sector in a pragmatic manner in dealing with this issue. Now, we won't want to affect local workers. We don't want to suppress wages. And within that framework, what can we do in terms of the labour importation scheme so that for employees with needs, they could apply for the necessary workers under the scheme? Perhaps I could defer to Mr. Matthew Cheung. Thank you, Mr. Wong, for your question. Yes, we fully appreciate the concerns of employers. At the same time, we fully appreciate the reservations of the labour sector. That's why we are taking a pragmatic approach here. Under the Labour Department, there is the supplementary labour scheme. Within this mechanism, we try to be as flexible as possible. Of course, there have to be actual needs, and we try to address these actual needs. So there is indeed a mechanism in place. And secondly, we need to encourage young people to join the trade. For example, personal care trade for elderly, we have made some breakthrough. We have now a new scheme for people to learn on the job, and this response has been good. And then the Chief Executive has reserved funds in deposit dress so that there will be 1,000 places under the scheme. Hopefully then more young people will join the trade. So we are adopting a pragmatic approach. Now, if necessary, we will allow the flexibility under the supplementary labour scheme to allow the importation of labour. At the same time, we need to give incentives to local workers. Now, we are looking at all fronts, not just women, where we look at the women's sector, we look at retirement, we look at ethnic minorities, new arrivals, and so on. We want to make the most of our local talents, but of course we should fully share your concern as well.
Mr. Wong Ting Kwong, the CS and also Mr. Zhang said that what you mentioned, would you be implementing that in the short term, especially for trades which have difficulties, particular difficulties in recruiting workers, on the condition that job opportunities and wages for local workers will not be affected? Will the SLS be implemented in the short term? In the LAB, for a period in the past, we have discussed this topic, and the LAB understands what kind of trades, especially in the care services and the construction sector, there is manpower shortage. So the LAB has agreed that further studies be undertaken, and we hope that by March we would go back to the LAB and to see if there is any room in the construction sector for labor importation. Will that more flexibility be allowed? Should we be compressing the time frame for the process? If there is a proven need, then we would do that. Mr. Albert Chand. Thank you, Chairman. We should have a comprehensive population policy, and it should be guided by the overall social policies of Hong Kong. If you look at neighboring countries and places, and the population policy is very much related to its development goals. Say, if you want to go to Canada, you have to know French or English as an immigrant, and they also look at the education and the economy of the place in coming up with the immigration policy. Now, Mr. Chong Chi-hwa said earlier or in the past that the university graduates should make up a certain percentage of the whole population. So on a macro level, can the CS tell us what is the government's direction? Say in Xinjiang or Tibet, the mainland government has plans to sort of filling up the places with Han ethnic people. And in Hong Kong, we are seeing 150 people coming to Hong Kong. More and more people are speaking Mandarin or Putonghua now, and more people are now speaking Putonghua in Hong Kong. And also, the Secretary for Education once said that Cantonese should not be deemed an official language. Well, later they changed the policy, but this is so shameful. So would the government act like the authorities in Xinjiang and Tibet? Well, say in terms of our immigration policies, we can ask the immigrants, or we can set the condition that anyone who comes in should know Cantonese. You talk about population policy, but then you are leaving it up to the central authorities to control everything. They have all the say in the one-way permit scheme, and some 50,000 people from the mainland are coming to Hong Kong. Is the government determined to uphold Hong Kong's special characteristics? If not, then 1 or 2 decades down the road, the population in Hong Kong would have changed. Our characteristics would have changed. So what is your population policy? Would you be ensuring that Hong Kong's special characteristics in our population be upheld, i.e. we have a diverse population. We allow people who come from Nepal, Pakistan, and so on, or we just filling up the place with mainlanders? At the Steering Committee on Population Policy, in the first several meetings, we explored our objective for our population policy. In 2002 and 23, we were very much economy-led, and i.e. how we can turn Hong Kong into a knowledge-based society, and we should map our population policy towards that goal. Now, this time, we want to nurture and develop a population that will continuously support and drive Hong Kong's social economic development as Asia's world society, and to agenda a socially inclusive and cohesive society that allows individuals to realize their potential with a view to attaining quality life for all residents and families. Now, behind all these words, we have to look at the actual figure projection. Now, local birth rate or fertility rate will remain consistently low. So if we have to achieve that policy objective, we have to absorb people from outside. Secretary, can you clarify what kind of people do you plan to absorb? Say, for Canada, they would only allow people who know French and English to emigrate there. So for Hong Kong, would we be using the same principle? Would we just allow those who know Cantonese to come to Hong Kong? Now, apart from attracting talents from overseas to Hong Kong, there is another objective, i.e. family reunion. Well, Ms. Lam is dodging the issue. Is Cantonese an important prerequisite? Do you think is important? I think as far as family reunion, I think it's a human rights issue. Now, if we introduce this factor that Mr. Chen mentioned, then that is not good. Now, apart from family reunion, for other immigrants who have to move into Hong Kong, should they be required to know Cantonese? Mr. Martin Liao, there have been comments that in attracting talents, the government should come up with an occupation list, shortage, in which, or listing out the areas where there is a manpower shortage. Well, by doing so, we can have a targeted approach in attracting talents. So I agree with that kind of saying, and I think we should make an assessment on the areas where talents are needed, and we should draw up a list. And perhaps we should even take a more aggressive, proactive approach to go overseas to attract talents to help Hong Kong's economy transformation. Now, I know that the SCPP will come up with concrete proposals in the latter half of the year. But in terms of drawing up a database and a list, can that be done immediately now so that we can expedite the work? Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Liao mentioned this point about the list, and that was discussed at the SCPP, and that was one of the policy objectives, i.e. we should draw up clear objectives or policies on the talents that are needed so that they can help drive the development of the relevant sectors. And very soon, I will work together with the various policy bureau directors to assess the manpower needed in their respective portfolios. And actually, in the different bureaus, they're already doing that, but we are going to do it more comprehensively. So Mr. Liao can rest assured that we are going to do that. Any follow-up from you? No? Mr. Lang Sing, followed by Ms. Alice Mack. On the population policy, we are all very concerned all along. By 2041, now every 1,000 population has to support for 712 people. How can that be done? Now, that has implications on welfare policies as well. Now, every time when there are elections held, there are promises made, pledges made, and there will be pledges made involving welfare services and so on. Now, couple this with the population change. If you can't find new sources of revenue, we will be plunged into a sort of predicament. Some scholars have mentioned that have come up with this theory of dichotomy of the economy, that we should head towards a high value added economy with low level of employment. So everyone will earn more to support the society. And if we go that route, we have to change drastically the industrial structure in Hong Kong. So I would like to hear from the administration in terms of the financial commitment that we're going to face in the future. What kind of timetable do you have in driving high value added industries? Are there advanced works? Would you be encouraging investors to do that so that they are confident that the policies will not change, even that there is a change of the government and the leaders in Hong Kong? And the investors will not be faced with unclear prospects. So my question is on high value added industries. What is the roadmap for Hong Kong? So that Hong Kong people, we know that we have the capability to shoulder the welfare spending. Thank you, Chairman. As in the last meeting, the population issues are wide-ranging. And in fact, every policy portfolio falls under the remit of the population policies. So the SCPP chose not to repeat work areas already undertaken by other bureaus or commissions. So we are working on two aspects as related to what Mr. Ng said. Now, because of an aging population, that will have an impact on our finances. So in the last year's budget, I've said that under the FSTB, the working group on long-term fiscal planning has been established and is almost completed its work, and very soon we'll be able to update members on our work, which has not been detailed in the consultation paper. Now, Mr. Ng mentioned about policy issues related to housing, welfare services, we would be able to cope with the long-term commitment given our existing economy and finances. Now, second aspect has to do with the economic development. I fully agree that the population policy should not be sort of segregated from the economic policy of a place. But the CE is leading himself the Economic Development Commission, and under it, it is studying several industries with potential. So what Mr. Ng would like to see, i.e. the high value-added industries, long-term planning for our industrial structure to expand our employment opportunities. All these will be deliberated on by the Economic Development Commission, and they will report on their work soon. Mr. Raymond Wong. Population policy is very much an economic policy from your angle. In the Task Force on Population Policy released a report on 2003, and it mentioned about the impact on Hong Kong's sustainable development. And in 2012, the SCPP talked about the same thing. In 2003, it advocated for turning Hong Kong into a knowledge-based society. And now this time around, you mentioned about in face of the slowing down of population growth, we have to increase labor productivity to maintain our economic growth, and we have to import workers. Now, you are trying to make the population sort of quantifiable factor in the overall population policy. All mainstream economists pointed out that in the developed nations, the costs of bearing or bringing up a child is increasing. It's the same situation in Japan. But Hong Kong is an extreme capitalist society. Commodity prices are soaring, and you are expanding the individual visitor scheme, and inflation is running wild. How can a family raise their children in an environment like this? Well, Chief Secretary, you already sent your children abroad to studies. But for the grassroots families, with inflation and exorbitant rental prices, how can they raise a child in that kind of environment? Well, shame on you. You are bringing in so many mainlanders. From 1997 up to now, you're bringing in some 700,000 people. You are also talking about expanding the individual visitor scheme. Now, over the lunar year, we see tens of thousands of people, waiting at the MTR trains and so on. You live in the mid-level, Secretary. You don't have to wait for MTR. I take the MTR every day, and I know all these problems myself. So have you addressed these problems in your population policy? You are having big talk here, but with no concrete measures. You going down the route of mainlandization. Now, the Secretary for Education talked about using Putonghua to teach Chinese. That was reported in the newspaper today. Well, this is wrong. Are you asking the LegCo to speak in Putonghua as well? Would Putonghua be used in court proceedings as well? Why is it that the Cantonese is not an official language of Hong Kong? If that is the case, then all the speeches here in LegCo would not be valid, or would not be good enough then. Yes, I have explained. Well, I want to ask another question. I don't know whether you have looked at the white paper on population policy in Taiwan. Please answer me. Well, we have we have a Taiwan near to us. Have you read that white paper? No, I haven't read it personally. Have your subordinates read it? Is that the case? Now, if you haven't read that white paper, let me share with you two things. In your paper, You talked about unleashing potential, bringing in supplementary sources of labor, and creating opportunities for the aged population and so on. You talk about the silver hair market, a lot of business opportunities. Well, all this is nonsense. If you look at the white paper, which was released in 2008, the one in Taiwan, they talk about children first and foremost. They talk about building a good system to take care of the children and the elderly. All these livelihood issues are mentioned in that white paper. They have made this important point, and that is to change the mindset of the society to see the elderly as a negative asset of the society. It is very much people-oriented, but then in your population policy paper, nothing is mentioned of that. Now, Mr. Wong, let me clarify. Now, all the tasks that you have mentioned have been attached importance by the current term, by the last terms of government. We have tried to build a positive image for the elderly, and we have tried to impart the concept that the elderly are a treasure of the society. That has been all along been the work of the Labour and Welfare Bureau. Well, what you have done is just piecemeal favors. There is no solution to the root of the problem.
Ms. Alice Mack. Mr. Chairman, it's a pity as far as this population policy document is concerned, because it seems that it's now been distorted into a labor policy that's whether we should import labor. But actually, when we talk about the population, we're not just talking about labor issues. We're talking about the livelihood issues as well. Now, just now, there's mention of whether we should import labor. So, as if a population policy is about bringing in labor. Actually, if you look at our own society, we see there's a group in the community, especially the young people. They face problems with seeking employment. Well, the policies address has only just started doing something. It's been lying idle for some time, but now it started to provide training for young people again. The other issues, of course, is about unemployment among the middle-aged group. And how do we deal with that? If we cannot address that, then how can we even talk about importing labor? It's rather disappointing. In terms of population policy, we talk about how we could unleash the potential of women on make them join, allow them to join the workforce. But are we doing enough? If you look at studies conducted overseas, for women who stay out of the workforce, the education level is going up in other countries. That's because the more highly educated actually want to stay home instead of working. So it's all about whether we have proper family-friendly policies, what sort of workplace do we have, what sort of working hours are we talking about. We're not just talking about grassroots women. Here we're talking about women with high education attainment. They are even more reluctant to join the workforce. So how do we address the issue? We shouldn't just put the focus on turning the population policy into a labor policy. That is, if we can't hire people, then we will just import labor. Is that what you want to do, Chief Secretary? Well, that's definitely not what we plan to do. If you look at the document, you see how it's presented. First, our focus is on increasing the size of the workforce. In other words, we want to attract more people to join the workforce. And then second initiative is to boost the quality of the workforce so that we will do more training, and we'll also minimize mismatch. In the policy address, already there are initiatives announced to strengthen work in these areas. Just now in my opening remarks, I've only highlighted the main initiatives, but actually there are other initiatives in the policy address that will help to upgrade the quality of our workforce. Ms. Alice Mack referred to the women's participation rate in the workforce. Yes, it's true. even for the more highly educated women, there is not a correspondingly higher participation rate in the workforce by women. In Singapore, there's a higher percentage. It's 57.5%, whereas Hong Kong is only 49.6% as far as women participation in the workforce is concerned. So that's why I said the Women's Commission is going to conduct studies to find out the reasons for that, and then we could make targeted response and encourage more women to join the workforce. Of course, at the end of the day, whether someone chooses to stay at home to look after the children full-time or to work is purely a personal choice. But of course, if family-friendly policies could help in making that decision, we'd be more than happy to explore the possibilities. Ms. Mack. I think in Hong Kong, our biggest challenge is the aging population, where population policy is concerned. Now, there's going to be another study on retirement protection. So what would you actually do to address the aging population in the context of retirement protection? Aging population, that's an irreversible trend. But when are you going to have retirement protection? Chief Secretary, as I said, we're not going to duplicate work already being done by other committees. On retirement protection, under the Commission on Poverty, there's the Task Force on Retirement Protection and Social Security. They are looking into that. They have commissioned a consultancy team led by Professor Nelson Chow. They are expected to hand a report in the middle of the year. Now, in the Policy Address 2040, the Chief Executive already said that when the report is received, the government will adopt an open mind in dealing with the issue. But of course, I would never underestimate the complexity and the controversies involving the subject. Mr. Tony Chair, thank you. Now, in the Consultation document, there is one question about whether we should set a cap on the population. The government has already made it clear that it is not desirable to impose a cap on the population. Personally, I would not object to that position. But when it comes to formulating a population policy, should it be the case that there should be a target for population growth or a target for the demographic structure? If there are not going to be such targets, I would have reservation about that. Because if without such targets, then when you formulate relevant policies, like in terms of infrastructure needs, education, housing, healthcare services, and other public facilities, and so on, if you don't have a target for population growth, you wouldn't know what you need to do. Now, there are some figures in the consultation document. They are just projections. Will we just base our policies on such projections, or would the government be more proactive so that we could formulate our policies in such a way that we achieve certain population targets? Now, Hong Kong is an international city. There are free movements of human capital. So what about the transit population as opposed to the permanent population? A transit population could have a lot of impact on the city. Would this be included in the study? Chief Secretary? Well, as Mr. Tse has pointed out, we've already expressed a position on whether there should be a population cap. We have said that we don't see the need given the current circumstances, because over a long period of time, our population growth rate has been on the low side. And the Census and Statistics Department has projected that there is not going to be a high population growth in the near term. So to support population growth is all about using our resources properly. So, like there are indicators, as you might recall, Mr. Tony Tse, in 2003 when we have study report, we said that by 2030 the indicator is that we'll have a population of 8.4 million. So we should have enough land supply to cope with this size of the population. But of course, that will involve a lot of land formation and other work. So the Planning Department and the Census and Statistics Department does review the population indicators from time to time. This will help us in formulating our policies in other areas. On the transient population, as Mr. Tse pointed out, we are an open society. Our population policy is such that we like to attract more talents to Hong Kong. Therefore, again, we're not going to set a rigid indicator in relation to the transient population. Of course, there is ever closer economic integration of the mainland. Many in Hong Kong now may choose to live on the mainland or in Shenzhen. So there are Hong Kong people living in Shenzhen who have to commute back to Hong Kong to work. And this is something the Census and Statistics Department will monitor closely, and we'll see whether we need to provide any support. Mr. Tse, now in projecting the population size is based on projections of the Census and Statistics Department, but then actually is interdependent. Because it depends on government policies. Maybe you encourage people to have more children, or maybe you have a scheme to bring in more talents that will affect the projections. So projections are affected by policies. If there is not a target for population growth, maybe you will always be passive. You're not able to proactively address issues, rather will be reactive. And then you're not able to come up with policies to deal with anticipated problems. Chief Secretary, yes, it's true to a certain extent is interactive. Now, when there are new policies, of course, the Census and Statistics Department will include these new policies in doing its population projection. For example, type 2 babies were primary source of population growth, but now because of the zero delivery quota policy, so type 2 babies no longer source of population growth. But of course, we have schemes to attract more talents to Hong Kong, but then there are certainties in these schemes as to whether talents will actually come to Hong Kong that's beyond our control. So we keep reviewing and revising the projection figures to reflect our policies. That's a pragmatic approach. Mr. Yu Siwing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On an aging population and insufficient labor, these are facts in Hong Kong. No one will dispute that, so we have to face up to them actively. Now, very soon in Hong Kong, we see plenty of people in their 80s, and for those aged 65 or above now is less than 1 million, but soon it will go up to 2.5 million by 2041. So if people retire at the age of 60, there will be over 20 years when the government will have to support them. If we could extend the retirement age to 65, the government will be able to lessen its commitment in taking care of these people, and also these people could earn an income. They could still support themselves and their families. Now, in the document, Chapter 4, the government in this paper, paragraph 4, the government said that it would take the lead in extending the retirement age for civil servants. But then we don't see for the private sector what you are going to do. So are you going to consider any policy that will encourage the private sector to extend the retirement age to 61 to 64, from 61 to 65? Because that would help immediately the aging population problem as well as the labor shortage problem. Chief Secretary, in Hong Kong there is not a statutory retirement age. We understand, though, as the biggest employer, the government and the subvented organizations may influence the behavior of the private sector by their own behavior. So as we explore the population policy issue, as I said, we're going to consider we're going to study the retirement age issue regarding civil servants. And when we have any proposal, we'll certainly consult civil service groups and the public on the government's proposal to change the retirement age. Now, would it then set an example for the private sector so they may follow suit? That's too early to say. But with labor shortage, we see that there are many businesses trying to find ways, suitable ways to extend the service of their staff. Because when we say that we want to release the potential of the workforce, the mature workers represent a huge group. There are many aged between 15 to 64, 1.6 million, and among them, 200,000 are between 60 and 64. Some may have retired early, and others are actually retirees at normal age. So if we can bring them back into the workforce, that will certainly help to offset some of the effect of a dwindling labor workforce. So we are going to listen to views collected in the public engagement exercise. We'll see what measures there are to help businesses retain their mature workers, and we are more than happy to listen to views. Thank you.
Mr. Yu Si-wing. Well, the government said that it will think up some incentives, but they may not give us a concrete reply today. But can you consider giving tax incentives to enterprises which are willing to postpone the retirement age? Well, that would be good incentive for them. Well, we can't rely on enterprises to do it on a voluntary basis. I've heard Mr. Yu's views. Second question about importation of labor. The government says that it would give priorities to construction sector and the care services sector. But, well, the shortage is not only limited to these two sectors. Will the government consider what other sectors need labor importation apart from these two sectors? Mr. Zhang, perhaps? We don't have a picture on what sectors are in need, but initially it seems that the construction sectors and the care service sector are in need. We should tackle them first, but it doesn't mean that we will not work on other sectors. The guiding principle is that local workers' interest will not be affected. Next, Dr. Fernando Zhang. For this population policy paper, I think overall it is an improvement from past papers, which are really poorly written. The first policy paper was really a fiasco. At that time, it was drafted by the Donald Zhang. The tax on FDH was a no-go. And then the CSSA for residents who have lived less than 7 years in Hong Kong, and that was overturned by the court. So for this population policy, we are just helping the old tunes, aging population, low fertility rate, challenges in terms of the labor shortage and so on. But there is a major blind spot. We depend very much on new immigrants to drive population growth, and we are focusing here about the mainlanders. And for cross-boundary marriages, over the years of 5 to 6 years, around 1/3 of locally registered marriages are cross-boundary marriages. So if we talk about the 150 quota, all of them are really for family reunion. Well, because of this policy or measure, it has resulted in a number of conflicts in Hong Kong. There are many mainlanders, and in the electrical, we heard many times that the new immigrants from mainland are the scapegoat. They are to blamed, so to speak, for the many social problems in Hong Kong. I think the administration is duty-bound to face up to the issue when it talks about population policy. These kind of conflicts are going to tear Hong Kong apart, so to speak. But the population policy paper is silent on this point. Now, the vetting authority on the one-way permit scheme, how to help the new arrivals to integrate into the Hong Kong society, and to how to eliminate discrimination against them. All these issues are having an impact on Hong Kong people's daily lives. And we are facing pressure in rising rental costs, commodity prices, and so on. All these have to do with our economic policies, and the government attaches a lot of importance to economic integration, but not social integration. So human beings are considered an economic being only. So the administration should just not focus on the economic development. Well, in your speech, the CS, you said that you will strike the right balance among three things, the creation of wealth, everyone is entitled to quality living, and as well as equal opportunities. You acknowledge that there may be conflicts among these three elements or components of your population policy. So in order to create wealth, we might sacrifice equal opportunities or quality of living. But please accord these two elements top priority over creation of wealth. We are not so much concerned about creating more wealth, but rather we want Hong Kong to be an equal society suitable for living here in Hong Kong. So please attend to this loophole. Do you want the CS to reply? I want to give more views first about long-term elderly care. This is also another blind spot. Today, you are still segregating the services for the PWDs and elderly and so on, and these policies are fragmented, and this is not sustainable. We must face up to the need for long-term elderly care services, and for the minorities, ethnic minorities, the women and children, how to better protect their rights and interests. All these are not being outlined in the paper. So about these several blind spots, please consider them and add in extra proposals to that in your proposals. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, I agree that that it's difficult to cap the population size, but the question is, we may not be able to cope with an increase in the population. In the past 18 months, the government has strived very hard to find land, including the proposal to reclaim land northeast of Lantau so that we have land to build houses for the new generation. But before we can do that, we're still talking about the cooling measures of the property market, the demand management measures and so on. So does the government have any measures or policies to slow down the population growth? There is, of course, natural population growth. There is a 150 quota under the one-way permit scheme, and most of it has to do with family reunion. I don't have any problem with that. That is a right of the family. But for other areas, the government has a say, including the capital investment entrance scheme, the talent emission scheme, and also non-local graduates are allowed to stay in Hong Kong for 1 year to find jobs, and then they can stay in Hong Kong. So this is a policy to encourage them to become part of Hong Kong. But then Hong Kong can't cope with so many people. So other measures and policies that the government can draw up to slow down the population growth rate. Second question, in the population policy and also the policy address, well, people have talked about the population size. Now it's less than 1.5 million people under the age of 65, and by 2041 it's going to be 2.51 million. Now, an important question is medical care services. I don't see that the government is allocating a lot of resources to that. Last year, you earmarked $13 billion in that regard, but for the 8 to 9 major hospitals in Hong Kong, I can't see how they can cope with the increased population. Now, in Kowloon Central, you will build another new hospital to sort of help substitute the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Now, the Asian population increased 2.5 times, but it seems that the government doesn't have any plans on providing sufficient medical services for the increased population. CS, thank you, Mr. Sin. Population growth comes from the 3 sources: natural population growth, the subtracting the death rate from the birth rate, and then second is the OWP, and also thirdly, the natural inflow and outflow of population. From 1997, 2012, 2013, 2017, 2007, and we are having a negative growth rate for the population in Hong Kong. So we depend very much on the natural population growth rate. Today, the birth rate is still higher than the death rate, so we don't see much room for us. We don't see need a major source for new population to come into Hong Kong. So there is no way that we can slow down the population growth rate. But we have also to take note that if we do that, we will have a negative impact on Hong Kong's economic development. Now, we say that there is a 4% economic growth rate in Hong Kong. 1% comes from the population growth rate, which drives the economic development. So we have to take care of that as well. Now, as for healthcare, you mentioned about $13 billion. That's for hardware repair and maintenance. Now, as for how to deal with the aging population, the Food and Health Bureau will continue to study the healthcare insurance proposals. Earlier, the government has earmarked a big sum for that work. I don't agree that up to the several blind spots mentioned by Dr. Fernando Zhang. We have, in fact, through the 2014 policy address, tried to resolve these problems. Dr. Zhang supported our work in ethnic minorities, and also we are trying to help children of low-income working families. For new arrivals, we will be strengthening our services for new arrivals through the relevant departments. We have not talked much about that in the paper, but then I promised that I would go back and consider whether more can be done to help new arrivals. Dr. Kenneth Chen. During Henry Tang's era, is not too much on population policy. Now, this steering committee on population policy was headed by Mrs. Carrie Lam. It seems to be doing a better work, but it's just trying to make up for the deficiencies last time. You said you wanted to advance with the times, but today, Hong Kong people are very concerned whether there is a cultural perspective to this policy. Some colleagues also mentioned that when the SALG is very happy with relying on the mainland to drive our economic development, have we forgotten that Hong Kong has a special or unique position in the international arena? We are an international metropolis, and after the handover, the international world say that Hong Kong has been very much a very sensitive place, but we don't see that kind of point reflected in the policy paper. Now, we when I studied in school, we termed Hong Kong people as marginal people. Well, that doesn't carry a negative connotation, because we try to position ourselves and we pride ourselves for finding a suitable position between the Western and the Chinese cultures. But then this kind of positioning is being undermined after the handover. Now we have recent discussions about Cantonese dialogue and the the Putonghua. All these controversies have not been mentioned in the paper. Well, we are very nervous about this kind of issues. I object strongly to using Putonghua to teach Chinese. I don't want to see our education being undermined gradually. An education is important. And in the U.S. recently, the Heritage Foundation has given us a ranking and saying that our corruption-free societies is being undermined, and that has to do with Timothy Tong. And even the ICAC its reputation is tarnished. Well, this is the kind of angle, the cultural angle that we should adopt in our talk about population policy. And I think you have a duty in governing Hong Kong to look at that angle as well. So I think it's so important to us to find our unique position in the international arena. So this cultural perspective is lacking in your thinking. We are not a human, we are not just economic beings. We're not just here to work and plan for retirement. So when we talk about population policy, we should have that kind of sensitivity. When I teach in a university, we talk about internationalizing Hong Kong, but it seems that we're not doing very much in Hong Kong. And when we talk about non-local graduates, and actually most of them come from the mainland, if we don't have the cultural sensitivity, then all these conflicts and confrontations are bound to arise. And this kind of social disparity is happening here every day. So my concrete question is this. In your paper, how are you going to convey a clear message to the talents in the international world that if they come to Hong Kong, their children should have adequate international school places? The English language environment here will not change. It's here to stay. Thank you.
Chief Secretary, thank you. Well, Dr. Chen, I don't know if you've noticed. Let me say it again. The objectives in our policy would fully reflect the elements you mentioned. That is, for Hong Kong to have a population that will continue to promote the growth of the city as an Asian city, Asian international city. Why is that our position? Because as Dr. Chen's pointed out, we just don't want Hong Kong to become another city of the country. We want to have an international dimensions. Only then could we leverage on the advantage of our status of one country, two systems. So we have never stopped short of promoting ourselves as an international city. And now, for example, I chair an international organization on various chambers of commerce. When something happened in Hong Kong that might spark concern among the international business chambers, I will immediately talk to them. And also for our overseas offices, apart from there are some 11 overseas offices, they also played an important role of promoting Hong Kong as an international city. Now, you might think that for this term of government, the chief executive is devoting more effort to mainland relations, but actually we have never slacked in promoting Hong Kong as an international city. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Now, in a Chinese society, the present, in the past, or in any political system, there is always this philosophy that we want to build a security network and we want to take care of families and so on. Now, Mr. Wong Chuk-man quoted from the Taiwanese white paper on population policy. I don't see our philosophy differs in any way. In your speech today, Chief Secretary, you also mentioned that we should take care of our old people, we should teach our young, and friends could also help each other out. So that means for the old, for the disadvantaged, they are all able to realize the potential. So to achieve that, all policies must be coordinated. Because we have a growing population, we need to meet their needs, and we want to see progress in society. We need to build a social security net. So we need to have enough economic activities to create wealth. And if we want economic activities, we must have the right talent and technology. So that goes back to one issue, using the labor supply in the construction sector as an example. Because as the chairman of the Public Works Subcommittee, I've expressed concern on behalf of members about the overrun of project costs. We wrote to you, and in your reply, Chief Secretary, dated the 22nd of January, yes, you quoted figures, they are true. That is, in the past, for public works projects, about for 10% of these projects, there is need to seek additional funding. And of the $620 billion spent on public works project, the increase is just about 3.4% in terms of the estimate. But that what happened in the past doesn't mean that then we don't need to show concern about the current situation and the future. Because it's true that in recent weeks there have been many cases of cost overrun involving public works projects. Now, we're not trying to blame departments for not, whether they're doing estimates accurately or not, but rather it's about population policy and economic policy, how all these interact. Now, as Chief Secretary mentioned that there are other bodies looking into economic issues in Hong Kong under the current term government. But if we want to have an overall blueprint for economic development, we still don't see it, and that's something of concern to me. So, Chief Secretary, how are we going to have such a long-term blueprint? How can we make sure that we have the right talents? Chief Secretary. Thank you, Dr. Low, for your reminder about public works projects. I can tell you we take public works projects very seriously, and we fully appreciate the pressure, the financial pressure on public finances if there is increase in project costs. So we'll work harder to monitor costs and contain costs. At the Steering Committee on Population Policy, we are rather passive in a way because we can't take over the work on economic development. That's why we need to keep in close contact with the Economic Development Commission. So we follow their discussion closely, and then we see what we could do in response. For example, the Economic Development Commission is doing a study on creative industries. I just talked to them members a few days ago on providing more training to local design talents. They are looking to that. In the policy address this year, there's an additional 1,000 subsidized places that would support or that would meet the talents needs in Hong Kong. So it's not just for university to decide what programs to start. But of course, as to what exactly we need to do, we have to wait for the relevant policy bureau to look into that. Mr. Gary Fenn. Mr. Chairman, as the Chief Secretary pointed out, this is the first meeting in the Year of the Horse. she's having with the House Committee, and is on the policy, is on population policy. But I can see that what you're proposing is very different from what people are talking about. And you say the population policy is controversial. I think it's nothing new that you've been evading the issue about a one-way permit. Our concern is that some try to use the pretext of a family reunion or mainland Hong Kong marriages, and then they take advantage of loophole to come to Hong Kong. You said there are some 5,000 odd reports in the past 7 years. Only for 1,000 cases there was conviction. So you keep evading the issue. You keep stressing family reunion, but you don't come up with actual solutions. On importation of labor, you're just trying to suppress further wages in Hong Kong. You want Hong Kong people to work for peanuts. And that's not going to bode well for the development of our labor force here. Now, we need to take into account local interests, and also we need to have a policy, say children policy, I think Dr. Fernando Cheung of the Labour Party keeps abusing the term children policy. It has nothing to do with this population policy. In the UK, Canada and other places, they are tightening their immigration policy. How can you say that's discrimination? So I think that's not proper use of the term. By 2041, for every 1,000 women, there will be just 786 men. That's the gender ratio. The government sees a substantial drop in the ratio, and that will certainly affect the workforce. It will also lead to social problems. So, Chief Secretary, 30 years on, when women can't find husbands and fertility rate is going to go down, or birth rates to go down, do you have any measures to address that? That is 30 years later, there will be an imbalance between the sexes. So how do you deal with that? Now I have another question for the Education Bureau, Mr. Kevin Young. Now you say that you want to upgrade the quality of the local population. In that case, why do you still want to keep sub-degree programs? This just means to delay the young people, delay the joining of the workforce by young people. So why don't you just provide more university degree places that would be more effective in boosting our the quality of our workforce? Chief Secretary. I agree the government is duty bound to take on many tasks, but then at the same time, we cannot expect the government to intervene on every issue. Now, Mr. Gary Fan is concerned about imbalance in the generation, but maybe that's not something the government could manage on its own. Well, for marriages registered locally, it's true about 36% of the marriages involve cross-boundary marriages. In other words, the spouses are from the mainland if the wives are from the mainland. Well, actually, the number is going up. I can give you the figure. 2013, Census and Statistics Department information. That is in the report on 2012. 20,000 mainland men. There are 35,000 mainland wives than husbands. So if we could resume the say over one-way permit, can we make adjustments here? Sorry, perhaps I put it the other way. Let me start again. Now, for cross-boundary marriages in the past 5 years, for the brides being Hong Kong people and the husbands being mainlanders, that number is going up. We do not know whether there's natural adjustment, but I believe there will be such a natural adjustment. There's no need for policy intervention by the government in addressing the imbalance in the between the sexes. But of course, Mr. Gary Fan's figures are true too. That's the phenomenon starting to see. 2012 figures among the 21,860 Hong Kong mainland marriages, 22.5% of the brides are from the mainland, still less than a quarter. Is there time for the Undersecretary to answer the other questions? Well, he's used up his time. There are a few others on the list, and maybe he can give answers on another occasion. Next, Mr. Wulang Kwok Hong. Mr. Chairman, population is rather vague. What does it mean by population? Population means people living in a place, right? Chief Secretary, perhaps in the past we just talked about economic structure. Now, after 10 years, we're beginning to see wider perspective. Then, for the population, shouldn't the Gini coefficient come down? Now it's 0.5 something. Would you promise to bring it down to 0.4 or below 0.4? Is really about the quality of the population, because whatever development we achieve, what's important is that the majority in the population are able to share in the fruits of social progress. So do you have any measurement mechanisms there? The budget is soon to be announced. Do you want me to start filibustering again? The elderly population getting poorer. What are you going to do about that? Young people being marginalized. In your education policy, are you still just going to keep the percentage at less than 20%? Would have access to subsidized university places. As for others, they have to take sub-degree programs and there are no prospects for them. And then for the actual wages, that's coming down. Perhaps because there's a capital coming from mainland that's caused inflation. Real wages are falling in real terms. Have you considered if there are new ways to define the minimum wage? Are there indicators to measure such developments? The third, another problem is that for early childhood education, you're not doing anything concrete. Now, Eddie would say things like Cantonese is not an official language. It is free time. What about early childhood education? Is it disintegrating? Are you dealing with that? And there's not enough diversity in our industrial structure. For the majority of us staying in Hong Kong, they're in the services sector, cleaning, security services. They earn low wages. And now you bring in more people from the mainland without any training, and they will come and bring wages further down because you're not training them. So are you addressing that? And then you're commercializing social welfare products or social welfare services. Would you abolish the lump sum grant, which is a undesirable policy? And another seventh issue is about the Gini coefficient. Now, our economic structure, we cannot just rely on mainland capital and we just focus on a few trades such as property speculation and financial services. Even the Liberal Party is saying that now. For some industries, the prices are going up on the mainland, so these industries could actually come back to Hong Kong. Have you considered it? If you haven't considered all these issues, how are we going to address all the problems in Hong Kong? Now, because the majority of the workforce is in low-value industries, only about 10% or so are in the high-value added industries. Of course, the wealth gap is going to extend. And now you say you have population policy. We're talking about old people, middle-aged, young people. There are so many sectors involved. Are you addressing all these issues? If not, then it's just empty talk. Now, I'm not asking you to give a reply today because I'm your nemesis. You're not going to appoint me to the Steering Committee on Population Policy. I'm trying to give you a comprehensive population policy. Now, if we could secure public nomination, I definitely will run for the Chief Executive, and then you won't be able to answer all these questions from me. Thank you.
Dr. Helena Wong, followed by Mr. Frederick Fung. My question for this CET is on the projection of elderly population. Has that included the impact of the type 2 children and also non-local graduates who have finished their undergraduate studies and choose to stay in Hong Kong? My first question is on type 2 children. From 2011 to 2013 July, there are over 200,000 type 2 children. And according to your paper, 57% will possibly stay and study in Hong Kong and live in Hong Kong. Now, so that adds up to around over 100,000 children staying in Hong Kong. So how are you going to deal with their education needs? This group of people, 100,000, will study from kindergarten to primary, secondary, and university. What sort of arrangements will you have? Would you be having some flexible arrangements so that these people will not face an extremely unfair competition? The second question is on non-local graduates. For local universities, whether we're talking about self-financed universities offering self-financed programs and other 8 UGC institutions, non-local graduates in 2003, the figure was only 1,595, and in 2013 is over 20,000 already, 20,870. By 2018, that would be 69,328. In 2008, the policy then was to allow the non-local graduates to stay in Hong Kong for without any conditions to seek jobs. Well, some of them ultimately will stay in Hong Kong to work. Now, as a population policy, does the government intend to take in these group of people? Well, that's not a bad thing because you want talent. But then we are now seeing the situation where the self-funded programs of the tertiary institutions, they are expanding indefinitely the number of non-local graduates, and they may not necessarily be the top-notch students. So does it mean that these non-top-notch graduates can stay for 1 year in Hong Kong to seek jobs? Are we opening wide another big door, i.e. we're not just absorbing the elite students, but rather whoever can afford it can live and stay in Hong Kong and study in Hong Kong? I will defer to Mr. Yong to tackle the second question on the local institutions taking in non-local graduates. According to the CNSD's latest population projections, there will be a decline in population growth, and that will aggravate the aging problem. According to the latest projections, that includes the policy since 2013. Well, the situation of zero delivery quota. Now, before that policy, we assumed that there were 20,000 type 2 children born in Hong Kong, but that has already been taken into account in the latest projection. Well, she has already said that that hasn't factored in. Now, for self-financed non-local graduates, they can stay in Hong Kong for 1 year and seek to a job in Hong Kong. Would that be creating another conflict here in Hong Kong after type 2 children issue? For these two type 2 children, it would be difficult for us to guess when the parents will send their children back to Hong Kong. But then for non-local graduates, they are a much needed source of our manpower, and I think that can help in our economic growth. So these two groups of people should not be compared per se. Next, Mr. Frederick Fung. I wonder whether the CS has heard or viewed the publicity programs or the publicity efforts seen on TV and radio. Our impression is that it focuses on insufficient labor shortage and there is an aging population, so we should allow people to retire later, and the housewives should come out of work, and please import labor as well. So these are the impressions that we get from the publicity programs. So population is labor import program, and labor population policy is aging population. So I'm mystified. Should the policy serve people or the people to serve the policy? I think the people should be given priority, and the economy is there to serve the people. The population may comprise different age groups, and we'll see how we tailor our economic development to suit the needs of these people so that they can realize their potential and enhance their quality of life. I mean, this is how we should seek opinions from the public. But we are seeing the reverse effect here in your publicity programs. People are just like ants, and people exist only for the sake of developing our economy. Do you think an adjustment is needed here? Yes. As I said, the population policy is a wide-ranging subject, and many issues are not dealt directly by the SCPP. Now, say the elderly care services brought about by the aging population, housing issues, and so on. These are not mentioned here. Now, we focus on workers or the labor force in Hong Kong in our paper. So that's why in our publicity efforts we emphasize on that. But then in the microfilm videos that we're going to produce, they will encompass more wide-ranging issues. So Mr. Fung can take a look at those. In any case, we would treasure every opinion expressed on the population policy. Now we are nearing the end of the consultation period. Would you be shifting your focus from how to find sufficient labor to how to drive the development of the society, which is in a way which is unique to Hong Kong? Well, I think Mr. Fung's has been rather abstract. But as I said in my introduction, we have already mentioned issues which are important, say ethnic minorities. Actually, we've already made proposals for improvements in the policy address already. So we will collate all the opinions gathered into the consultation exercise, and we adopt a wide perspective, and we will not just focus on the labor force. In your speech tabled, you listed out all the initiatives in the policy address, but that goes against what you said just now. You are trying to support the ethnic minorities, provide childcare services, and so on. All these issues actually have been discussed, were discussed during Mr. Tong Chi-wa's era. And actually, we don't need to have more deliberations on those issues. I don't think these should be included in the population policy paper. I think you should have already acted on these issues a long time ago. We have taken reference from the EOC's report, and I think we should not wait till after the consultation before we take the work forward. So I understand that those concerned groups on ethnic minorities are very concerned about these issues. So that's why we have included recommendations in the policy address. So I would like to thank the CS and for attending the meeting. A total of 16 members have spoken, and 9 are still on the waiting list. In the interest of time, regrettably, they are not given an opportunity to speak. You have to arrange another time. Well, for the past 2 meetings, I haven't had the chance to speak. I was the first one to press the button this time. I wasn't given the chance to speak, and many colleagues hadn't the chance to speak either. So I think it's maybe 1.5 hours is too short. Perhaps at an appropriate time after the consultation period, I will arrange with the CS for her to come again. All right, immediately we will. Now we will hold the regular House Committee meeting.